Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Can a country of 1.43 billion people, the fifth largest economy in the world and rising soon, maybe in the next two years max, to be a $5 trillion economy with an army of 1.4 million people, with paramilitary forces of more than 1 million people, with 200 plus nuclear weapons, etc., 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 kind of a startup dreamland of the world. Does it have to be afraid of a man called George Soros? Now that question has come up. George Soros is a highly polarizing, controversial and news-making figure. He says something, it makes news all over. He is quite newsy, he is headline worthy. That's why you find a lot of the global forums, including Davos, they invite him routinely to speak because they are waiting for that one headline that comes out of George Soros. Because of all the global investors, there's also Warren Buffett, for example, rarely talks politics of this level, rarely has these delusions of grandeur that he can control what happens in the rest of the world, including America, right? America and the rest of the world. But George Soros makes that headline. So just as you might find that TV channels will always invite people who will say something nutty to make headlines or to get eyeballs, global forums also invite George Soros. At the same time, George Soros has got something with him. One, he's got tens of billions of dollars, not always with himself. At this point, his net worth is about little over $8 billion. But with his investors, with his funds, etc., etc., plus on the markets, he's a kind of a whiz kid. He has made a lot of money in the markets. He's self-made, he takes contrarian calls on the market, and because his net worth continues to get better and a lot of investors stay with him, you would like to presume that he's got success on the market. So he's got that thing going for him. So very newsy, very polarizing, very controversial and a cantankerous character. I have also interacted with him. I will mention to you about that. All of that makes him a very interesting character. Should you be scared of him? Now look at what our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said about him at this Munich conference. He said he described him as old, rich, opinionated and dangerous. Now let's look at all these adjectives. Old, rich, opinionated and dangerous. Old, fact, incontrovertible. He was born on August 12, 1930, which means a few months from now, about 5.5 months from now, he will be 93 years old, right? That, okay. I mean, you might say, I know that on social media, Jaishankar has got a little bit of a flack for being ageist, for talking about somebody's age. But you know, this is a fact. He's 93 this year. He's closer to 93 than 92, in fact, at this point. And why that age is important. He may be fitter, he may be smarter than anybody at 19 for all I care. But the fact is that vintage, a man turning 93 this year, has seen a lot. And in this case, this man has seen the Holocaust. He was in Hungary when the Germans came and occupied, when the Nazis took over, and Jews were being sent away to gas chambers. He was 13 years old at that point. So he has seen the world evolve. Then through the Second World War, then the Cold War, so many decades of the Cold War, and then the unipolar world, and then the rise of all the great new savants of free markets, Thatcher, Reagan, etc., 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 Alan Greenspan, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, Paul Volcker, who seems to like George Soros very much. When you are that age and you've been successful and you've been in public debate, right? Then you've seen a lot. So age matters. In his case, so the first thing is a fact. He's old, born on August 12, 1930, 93 this year. Number two, rich. No doubt about it. He's rich. He's not among the richest people in the world, but he's very rich, right? 8.2 or 8.4 billion dollars, because these things are marked to market every day, is a lot of money. Plus, he has a lot of money on call, and his funds invest a lot of people's money. So he is a very rich man. So second thing is also factual. Third, opinionated. That is as factual as his date of birth, because he's been talking opinion. He's an opinion obsessed man, old or young. In fact, when I read up on him, and there is plenty written on him, you will find, and I found that even when he was a student at LSE, he escaped from Hungary in a very clever way. At 13, between the age of 13 and 14, because his father figured that they were Jews and they might be taken away to gas chambers also. So first of all, they did whatever they could do to hide their Jewish identity. They were a family of non-practicing Jews, right? They were not religious Jews. They did not follow any Jewish practices. And then he made a big deal of it that I don't follow any Jewish practices. Then in the course of time, he began to package himself as a Christian or not a Jew. And that's how the second name Soros came in. In fact, the family's second name was Schwartz. Schwartz is as Jewish as Singh or Subramaniam or Jadhav might be Indian. Schwartz became Soros, right? Soros can mean soaring up or whatever, I don't know for sure. There are many interpretations, but Schwartz became Soros to hide that Jewish identity. Then between the age of 13 and 14, in his young teens, George Soros was given away like a godchild to a Christian official on the pretense that now that he'd become a godchild of a Christian official, he was a Christian too. That gave him security. And that's when probably George Soros learned to be cynical for the first time early in his life, because this official's job was to identify Jewish people, Jewish businesses, take them over, and also then give them externment or deportation permits. Deportation permits weren't just to say that, okay, you leave this country, go to Britain or go to America or go to someplace. That was basically deport them to wherever Hitler was deporting the Jews, mostly to gas chambers. So he went along with it. He later justified it in an interview with 60 Minutes, and you will see some stills of that. We can't run any video because that's copyrighted by the publishers there. But you will also see a couple of lines that he spoke in that interview, which have featured in my friend Sandeepan Dev's wonderful article on moneycontrol.com. I wish it was ThePrint.in, but I take Sandeepan Dev, my former colleague. He served as editor of Financial Express in my times in the Indian Express when I was group editor-in-chief. I read him very carefully. He is a man on the right of center, the sanest of the sane that you can find, right? He makes a very good point on the right of center. So in his article, he quotes from this interview and some other people also who then find it quite strange that even in this article, he justified what he had done at 14, because he said, look, it was a case of if these people weren't going on this train, somebody else would go on this train. I could be going on this train, so might as well be on the safer side. And in the course of time, his family bought documentation basically to prove they were not Jewish, bribed their way out of Hungary and came to Britain. That's when he went to LSE. So even when he was at LSE, it is widely known that he would go to London's Speaker's Corner and hold forth by himself. So cynical, trained to be cynical very early on, non-practicing Jew, trained to be cynical, sold off, even if he was a juvenile, street smart enough, cynical enough to go along with what was happening to other Jews in Hungary, as long as he could find his way to safety. But opinionated. So opinionated, you can go right back now to 1950-51 in London. George Soros studying at LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science, holding forth on Speaker's Corner. After that, as he rose as a global investor, he wrote a whole bunch of books. Many of these will feature on your screens. I'm not talking about each one in any detail because that takes too long. And you know what? I believe that George Soros at any point of time, even at this point of time when he's making such a lot of news in India, deserves more than 15-17 minutes. So I'm not going into his books, etc., except to say that sometimes he's been right, but often he's been wrong. So thrice he predicted a global financial collapse. First two times he was wrong, third time it turned out right. 2008, 2009, and that's when there was that famous or infamous quote from him saying, I have gone wrong many times, But even the boy who cried wolf got it right the third time. So he got it right the third time. The other way of putting this is that, look, even a broken clock would show you the correct time at least once in a day. But the fact is that he's been writing his books. He's been dominating the opinion world on his side, and he's been funding a lot of opinion making. Again, philanthropy. If you look at his philanthropy, his net worth today may be $8.2 billion. But until now, on all accounts, and I've seen Bloomberg, I've seen Forbes, etc., he has given away more than $32 billion of his income to causes that he supports. So that in that sense, he is very influential, because this kind of money going to NGOs, activists, even media can make a big difference, particularly in weaker economies, weaker political systems, weaker countries. So he's opinionated, and he's opinionated, he's rich, he's seen the world, he's learned to be street smart, and because he's opinionated, he is willing to spend his own money into at least trying to make sure that the world is molded according to his opinion. That's what makes him, in my book as well, dangerous. That makes him dangerous because people like him have no accountability. They have very little stakes. They live in the safety of America. He can say whatever he wants against the American system, right? He didn't like Donald Trump. He called him all kinds of things. He's funded the election campaigns of all Democratic candidates in the past 30 years or so. That is Obama, both the Clintons, Joe Biden. He's given away money to foundations to try and bring down Donald Trump. He also endowed a lot of money, gave away a lot of money to defeat George Bush the Junior. He did not want him re-elected. So in America, he does all that, but this has limitations, right? He's one of the biggest contributors, say, to the Democratic Party. Everybody knows it, it's transparent. But when he goes out and does something in a smaller economy, that becomes a problem. Hungary, for example, his motherland or his fatherland, that is where he was born. He's a Hungarian native who then became an international citizen and an American. Hungary passed a Stop Soros law. In fact, a set of Stop Soros laws. Now, these are not laws passed. I will share an article from The Guardian with you. It's a Reuters article from The Guardian explaining what these laws are. These are not laws to stop Soros from coming there. I see a lot of folklore now in the Indian media also, particularly a lot of the spoken Indian media. People saying, oh, his own native country had to pass a Stop Soros law, so he can't come in. This was a law they passed. They called it Stop Soros laws, and I tell you why. They passed these laws to make sure that no NGO, activist group, human rights groups could be funded by Soros, either funded by Soros or people like that could campaign for asylum and rights for immigrants coming into Hungary. Now, this was at a time, this is 2018, this was at a time when European Union, you know how the Europeans are at that point, were very sentimental about what was happening in the Arab world, because after Arab Spring, many countries had broken up and crises in Syria, Libya were going on. Afghanistan was a persistent crisis and lots of refugees were coming in. So European Union had actually allocated quotas to its members to take these migrants, because Europe has that conscience about migration. Hungary was going to have no part of it, because Hungary is led by Viktor Orban, who is a man of the right, hard right nationalism, and he was not going to accept any of this. So he passed this set of laws because immigration is something that Soros supports. Soros also strongly opposes all nationalism. Now, opposing all nationalism also comes easy to Europeans, particularly older Europeans, because they believe, quite rightly, that nationalism it was that broke Europe in the Second World War. And that, in fact, both the world wars, because it was nationalism of various states in Europe that set one state at the throats of the other. So that's why European unity, European Union, etc., have come in. George Soros doesn't like that. He had been funding these groups in Hungary who were supporting the asylum demands or asylum cases of these refugees or migrants, mainly from Arab countries or Muslim countries. These laws completely stopped that. As a result, as of now, Hungary hasn't given asylum to even 1,000 people, whereas so many of the European countries around it, so many members of the European Union have done exactly the contrary. They've got a lot of immigrants, and that's now causing problems. We featured on CutTheClutter the issues that have taken place in Italy, issues that have taken place even in Sweden, and how this resentment of the new immigrant, mostly Muslims from the Arab world broken by Arab Spring and Afghanistan and Libya, etc., and some parts of Africa, how these have now become big political issues, and they are driving the popularity of the nationalist right in European countries. Now, what are the other things that George Soros has done in the markets? He became famous or infamous, depending on which side you are on, in 1992, when he got the sobriquet man who broke the Bank of England. That's because he said UK's economic monetary policies are all wrong. Their interest rates, etc., were all wrong. He's somebody who plays the markets. And if you go back, I told you I had an encounter with him. I recorded a walk the talk with him in 2009. And I asked him this question that, look at it, you are an interesting guy. You don't trust the markets. You always are speaking against the markets, and yet you make money from the markets. So he's like that. He stands against market fundamentalism. And then he says that, look, because you are a market fundamentalist, if you don't follow the principles of free markets, you will pay and I shall make you pay. And that's how he makes a lot of his money. So 1992, he said the British pound was overpriced. The British central bank kept on supporting the pound, Bank of England. They kept on borrowing more money, collecting more money to support the pound, but he had already got a war chest ready. So the more they supported the pound, the more he shorted it. In the process, he spent 10 billion pounds in no time, right? This was 16th of September 1992, or what was called as Black Wednesday. That's when the pound broke. After that, the pound was devalued. For a while, Britain pulled out of the European exchange rate mechanism, etc., and that was a big victory for George Soros, and that's what set up the legend of Soros, the predator from the left of the market. Strange character, the predator from the left of the market. Then 97-98, the East Asian currency meltdown took place. Again, he found a similar opportunity there. He found Malaysia, Thailand, they were supporting their currencies and their currencies were overvalued. So he went in there and again made a lot of money. So Bank of England, pound, it's widely estimated that he made £1 billion. Billion was a lot of money in 1992, 31 years back. 1998, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, more Thailand, Malaysia, again he made a lot of money shorting their currencies. And what he did with the currencies at that point led to massive instability and led to regime changes or government changes in some of those countries. That gave him an even bigger image of a powerful predator who could bring about regime changes or government changes. Then came 2008. 2008, by that time, a crisis was building up by 2008, and he had seen that was coming up. So he began talking about it. That is the one prediction that he believes he got right. But since then, he's carried on doing the same thing. Now, there are people like Sandeepan Deb who think that he's doing all this because he's eyeing the Indian markets, that Indian rupee is not convertible, so he can't play with the Indian rupee. Although I can tell you in 2008 winter, there was a concern when Indian rupee was weakening, dollar was strengthening, and RBI was supporting the rupee. There was a concern among the higher echelons of the economic leadership in the country, monetary leadership in the country, that look, if you support the rupee too much, someone like George Soros could be waiting in Dubai and raid you and start shorting your currency and do the kind of stuff that he did with East Asian countries. So a lot of precautions were taken at that point. So nobody trusts him because he could do really dangerous things with you. Now, how do you slot him? And do you slot him as a dangerous global predator who's opinionated, who's armed with native smarts, who's armed then with market genius, and who is then obsessed with his opinion and unmindful of consequences? In fact, in that 60 minutes interview, the interviewer asks him that, look, you broke these East Asian currencies and their economies. Do you know With your actions, so many people suffered. So his answer is something like, do I care? How do I care? I'm in the market, I'm making money. So the interviewer asks him that, who's speaking now? There is a moral Soros and there is an immoral Soros. So is this the immoral Soros speaking or the moral Soros speaking? And he said something like, it's the same, which is nonsense. It is not the same. He's somebody who has fun in the market as he sees fun. He's brutal. I don't think he cares very much about human misery or what his actions might cause. He's also obsessed with himself and he thinks, I have the money, I have the smarts, and I can bring about resolutions in different parts of the country that I want, because you know what? I'm such a smart guy and I'm so powerful. And that's what makes him not such a benign character. Now, if you want to see a clearer view of him, this is a view coming not from the right? Because right may detest him. This is a view coming, if anything, from the left of center. So Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate economist and New York Times columnist, who I sometimes agree with, but oft times do not agree with. Not that I understand very much economics, but I understand the politics of economics. But he wrote something in his book, and this is his book in 1999, just after the East Asian financial meltdown. So on page 160 of his book, The Accidental Theorist and the Dispatches from a Dismal Science, published by W.W. Norton, Paul Krugman writes, and I quote, "Nobody who has read a business magazine in the last few years can be unaware that these days there really are investors who not only move money in anticipation of a currency crisis, but actually do their best to trigger that crisis for fun and profit." That's exactly what I said to you 2 minutes back. So let me repeat it again for you from Krugman, and I quote, "Nobody who has read a business magazine in the last few years can be unaware that these days there really are investors who not only move money in anticipation of a currency crisis, but actually do their best to trigger that crisis for fun and profit. These new actors on the scene do not have a standard name. My proposed name is Soroi, S-O-R-O-I. So in conclusion, for all the reasons we listed before, and this very pithy assessment from Paul Krugman, who is a man on the left of center, you can conclude that George Soros indeed is dangerous. Although I would say conspiracy theories about him, which are a lot in many countries of the world, make him out to be much more powerful than he is. He talks a lot. He can do damage. He is a bully in the markets and he is a bully in the opinion place. He's also a bully wherever he sees either market excess or he sees too much nationalism. But you know, India is a very different kind of a country, and Indian nationalism is much deeper and much stronger and much more widespread than for someone like him to be able to play with successfully.